Thanks so much, Tracy. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're presenting from today. So, this is Dharawal country that I'm presenting from. I feel very privileged to sit between not only the escarpment but the ocean as well. And I feel like that it's so important to be able to connect with the land in which we all, are a part of today, and where you might be watching this webinar from. I'd also like to, I suppose, extend that, acknowledgement of people in the room that do have that lived experience. And I actually you know, um, really resonate with this topic. This is a hard topic. So if you feel like it's too much, please feel free to step away, but also to make sure that you're safe and make sure that if you are listening to this, wherever you are, that it's an area where you can sit back and actually listen to the discussions. So tonight, and how it will work is pretty much we have a series of amazing speakers and presenters, from expert panelists right through to lived experience and actually service providers. So let's meet the speakers so we can kick the night off because we have a very small amount of time to hit such a big topic. This will be the first out of a few webinars that we'll have on domestic abuse, but tonight is all about coercive control. So we'll start with the wonderful Dr. Anastasia, because we sit on the board together. We have an amazing, a clinical psychologist who is also the founder of the Australian Institute and Human Wellness, specialising in trauma and PTSD and addictions. So, Anastasia, as a board member, we've spoken a lot about a whole heap of different topics, but I really I actually haven't read your book, The Dopamine Brain, but I've watched and all the webinars and all the different information come through. It is on my list of books to read over the next session break. So I do want to actually extend a little bit of a shout out that as I was doing a little bit of research with Anastasia, I realized that you're a little bit of a country and western. Um, you play the piano beautifully and sing as well, which I think that that's a beautiful distraction for making sure that a balance to your clinical duties as a professional, but also to that balance of well-being. So, if you haven't popped on to Anastasia's website, it'll be in the chat. Please do, because there's some amazing information on there, but also the links to the dopamine brain as well. So I'm just going to talk with Stacey. So Stacey is the founder of Skate Bags. Hopefully I've said that right. But also too has a really amazing story of lived experience. She's a big advocate for crisis resources, but also recovery as well. I had the pleasure of meeting Stacey actually at the warehouse that opened a number of years ago, and I really connected with not only your story but your passion, your courage, finding strength through your story. It makes it actually quite emotional because it really resonated with so many things that I stand for as well. So, Stacey is an amazing advocate here in the Illawarra, but nationwide. So please connect with her on social media and through her website because her story is absolutely outstanding, which we'll hear part of today. So Mackenzie is a frontline case worker supporting women in that impact domestic, family, and sexual violence. Very strong advocate in that justice system as well. I feel very privileged to have Mackenzie online today. We've done a few research projects together. We've had some really meaningful discussions about how we can look at community a little bit closer to actually support women in need right now. And so tonight, I think that they're the three important parts. Learning the science about what happens or the research, but also looking at that lived experience, but how right now we can actually impact and educate females, in particular tonight, on how to get help. So that's enough, I suppose, from me just for now. But thank you, ladies, for being part of tonight. I'd like to probably hand straight over to Anastasia and just pretty much what is coercive control. So talk us through what what we need to know to support others.
Yeah, so if we set the scene for context, the topic that we're talking about, coercive control, in the context of domestic abuse. Whenever I talk to people about this topic, whether that be in the clinic or broader community, I always sort of come back to the word coercive. If we look at a definition of what to coerce someone means or to be coercive, we're really talking about trying to get someone to do something against their will and going about that via different strategies and with different approaches. And so when we look at coercive control in the context of relationships, we are looking at kind of patterns of behavior where someone may use threats, humiliation, degradation, intimidation, or other forms of abuse, whether that be emotional, psychological, verbal, or physical, to harm someone, to frighten someone, or to potentially punish them in some way. So I guess that's kind of like a bigger picture, maybe sort of definition as to what we're talking about when we talk about coercive control in the context of domestic abuse.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is, quite a confronting topic, but I suppose what are some of the links to coercive control into mental health in general? We'll probably find out a little bit more from the lived experience, but also speaking with Mackenzie in service now. But what do you see are those psychological impacts with that within mental health?
Yeah. When I see people in the clinic who are presenting as being part of a relationship that shows signs of coercive control, I mean, people are often not referred for that reason. They go to their GP and the referral comes through as like anxiety or depression or low self-esteem, right? So where I think in the medical field, better at identifying the some of the kind of ways in which the trauma of coercive control presents as a whole range of different kind of psychological features, as opposed to identifying the coercive control or the domestic abuse itself. So typically that would look like an individual perhaps having features of depression or anxiety, a trauma and or PTSD, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be PTSD, but some sort of presentation of trauma. Typically, we'll see because of the way coercive control is enacted, patterns of low self-esteem that develop for a person. They've really sort of come to doubt their own sense of self, their own sense of identity, their own kind of place in the world at times, and really a sense of perhaps feeling uneasy and unsure about who they are in the world. So that sort of impacts a sense of self and self-esteem. It could be sort of difficulties with sleep, with eating, with sort of general day-to-day stress. Also, kind of ongoing concerns with trust in relationships, even once someone is no longer in a relationship with someone who is a perpetrator of coercive control or domestic abuse. We see those ongoing difficulties trusting other people in relationships, understandably, as a result of the trauma someone's experienced. And also sometimes alongside with the impacts of the trauma, I'll often a lot of my work's in substance abuse and addictions, so I will also see comorbid addictions present as well.
Yeah, I find that fascinating that some people come in to see their specialist and for maybe anxiety, depression, and then, as you said, it kind of opens from there to go. It probably takes a little bit of exploring all the right questions to ask from the health professionals to actually unlock that. So tonight we might have a number of people who are going to see their GP about situations, but we, you know, it probably takes a little bit of exploring all the right questions to ask from the health professionals to actually unlock that. So tonight we might have a number of people who are going to see their GP about situations, but we, you know, it probably takes a little bit of exploring all the right questions to ask from the health professionals to actually unlock that. So It might be more of a discussion, or people might not want to talk about this up front, or not even realize that it's happening. Is that,
That's
yeah?
exactly what I was just going to add to what you were saying, Simone, that it's one thing for us to sort of say maybe people are not maybe GPs are not communicating that to us or something, but it's actually not uncommon for me to be speaking with a client and for them to be describing features of their relationship that they feel are impacting, on their general stress or mood. But actually, what they start describing are some very unhealthy and worrisome patterns in their relationship that actually point to a bigger picture of coercive control, which then requires some important but delicate conversations to be had to be able to kind of explain to someone that actually what you're describing, patterns of someone isolating you from your family, gaslighting and manipulating you, constantly criticizing you and putting you down, denying you sort of freedom and autonomy, controlling your finances, all these features being actually features and patterns that we see within abusive relationships where there is coercive control. So actually just educating someone around that, which sometimes is something that they've kind of perhaps questioned themselves but never wanted to sort of tell anyone or speak about with anyone. But educating them is a really important part of, I guess, working with them through that process.
Yeah, that's a really valid point too, because it might actually be going to the GP might be actually monitored as well, or going to seek help and professionals might also be monitored. All right, so I really like how you've contributed to the anxiety and depression and some of those, non-physical type of abuse. Um, is it more linked to the non-physical or the physical abuse side, or can it be either?
Either and both. And I think the thing for us to remember and what the research and statistics kind of point to is that there can be a history of no physical abuse in a relationship, and yet someone leaving a relationship where there is patterns of coercive control can be very much at risk at then kind of experiencing physical abuse or at the risk of more serious things. We know that the riskiest time for someone is when a woman leaves a relationship or when they're pregnant, and the period before and after childbirth. They're the riskiest times for a woman who's in a relationship with someone where there are those signs of coercive control and patterns of coercive control. And even if there's been no history of physical violence, that doesn't mean that there won't be in the future. So I think we really need to take the non-physical signs as seriously as we have historically taken the physical signs.
Yeah, okay. So that's an interesting fact with especially with the pregnant person or as someone leaves as well. So that's probably a good note from a bystander to actually support people within that and actually look for, opportunities to ask those questions. Okay, so I might come back round. I do have a question a little bit later in regards to evidence and resources, as that social work side of me goes back to research every time. So I just wanted to come and ask you a couple of questions, Stacey, in regards to, you're the founder of an amazing organisation that is assisting people on the ground right here or right now with supporting them if we do have women that are needing to leave. Um, I'd like to find out a little bit more about not just your story, but what you've done so far to assist people in this situation right now.
Thanks, Simone, and good evening, everyone. Yeah, my name's Stacey Jane. I'm the founder and CEO of Esker Bags, and we provide free escape bags for families and individuals escaping domestic and family abuse across Australia. We have two variations of escape bags, parent and child and single adult. So they're not gender specific, but obviously we know that it is mainly women and children that do use our service. Uh, Esker Bags was born from my own lived experience with domestic abuse and coercive control. So I know exactly what it's like to, feel trapped, isolated, and at times, seemingly without options at all. From the beginning of my relationship with the perpetrator of my abuse, I felt like he was just collecting a log of my biggest insecurities and fears, only to use them against me in the most, malicious of ways, really. And, I've always touched on, technology abuse. And that was certainly a thing for us in that relationship, where my every move, conversation, and even bank transactions were being monitored by him through the use of software that he'd had downloaded on my mobile phone. So eventually, when that's all going on, you're not quite sure why they're always 10 steps ahead of you. Whether I was trying to reach out to different agencies or speak to a friend, he always knew what was going on. So eventually I just stopped moving and stopped talking, really, to the people around me, not realizing at the time the unhealthy psychological bond that was forming, which I now know to be a trauma bond. All I did know was that the worse he treated me, the more I needed him to make me feel better. And I often say to people, it was like he was almost my poison and my remedy. Mm. However, everything changed for me in 2019. We were both on board a cruise around New Zealand, and I'd met a really wonderful Australian family on board who, after seeing me alone on several occasions, took me under their wings. So we played a lot of bingo and charades. Not that I won anything for that family, but they were just really kind to me. And, they've often said we knew that there was something not quite right, but they didn't want to pry. However, on the last night of the cruise, I was very violently attacked by him, and the people in the cabin next door alerted security. And the security on board, I can't fault them. They were incredible. They moved me to a completely different cabin on the other side of the ship, and he was, nowhere to be found. I think, like most cowards, he hid, but there's only so far you can go on a boat that's yet to dock. However, security did catch up with my friends at breakfast the following morning as everyone was disembarking, and they said, "Have you seen Stacey?" And they said, "Yeah, we said our goodbyes yesterday afternoon. She's a bit younger than us, so stayed out a little bit later." And the security manager said, "Look, there was an incident last night, and she could probably do with a friend." And they had a very short family meeting. And just after 7 o'clock that morning, there was a gentle knock at the door. And there they all were, 6 very concerned faces with a plate of breakfast and a cup of tea. And, they saw the state that I was in, both physically and mentally, and said, "This is the start of your new life, and you're coming home with us." And I did. So I stayed with that same family for the remainder of my trip, which was only a week, and I had to fly back to England. And that's when I moved into a women's shelter. Now, unfortunately, that wasn't the safe haven that I'd expected it to be either. There was a lot of women there in a very dark place, doing not very nice things. There was a lot of drug and alcohol abuse and even prostitution. And I think the longer I stayed there in that safe house, I realised that that wasn't an environment that someone can grow in. And I think, unfortunately, for those other ladies, they had ultimately started to live a life that, they simply didn't belong in. And I truly believe that's because they felt like the system and probably society had turned their back on them. However, after 5 months of living in that women's shelter, the perpetrator of my abuse located me again. And I was offered a lifeline by that same Australian family. And they just said, "Come home, bub." And I made the permanent move to Australia, and applied for my one-way ticket to start again and be safe. I never went to the police about the perpetrator of my abuse. That wasn't something that I felt safe to do at the time. And I know, having spoke to other victim survivors, they've understood that. So after maybe 3 months of living in Australia, I think I became very unwell. Wasn't too sure what was going on with my mental health. Was having terrible panic attacks, night terrors, and I ended up going to the doctors, and straight away they said, "We need to take you to hospital." And I was diagnosed with complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And a couple of weeks later, I'm not sure whether people online will have heard this story, but Mozzie, my Aussie mum, she's a character. But I remember her saying to me, you know, what can we do to help alleviate some of these symptoms that you're experiencing? And I said, Mozzie, I'm going to get a sewing machine. And I remember her looking at me thinking, you know, surely you want self-defense classes or some kind of mental health support. But one of the things that they always encouraged us to do in the women's shelter was, you know, to be creative or to bond together in some way by organising different activities. And there was a make and mend class to learn the basics of sewing machine and how to make a simple tote bag. So that's what I did here in Australia, primarily just for my mental health to give me another focus. And I think that's when I really realised the huge gap in immediate and practical support. Often, you know, victim survivors flee with nothing, no essentials, no plan, just sheer desperation. And we know that moment of escape is so critical. And it's often where the system does fail. So starting Escabags wasn't just about creating a charity for me, far from it. It was really about creating something tangible that I wish I'd had access to during my own attempts to escape. So each escape bag we provide, you know, it isn't just a bag of essential items either. I really believe that it's a message of hope that someone out there cares and that survival is possible.
Mm, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing some of your story about, what I'm hearing is strength, is courage, is, also big shout out to the Australian family that actually supported you through some of that. Like, how encouraging to have people around us that actually support us. Um, so I wanted to ask, one, I have seen what's in some of your bags, and it's amazing. It's just, like you said, it's not just essentials things. It's like real, like bottles of shampoo, conditioner, like nappies. It's real things that people need straight away. So, um, if you are interested to supply these bags or actually know more about them, please check out the website that we've put in the chat as well. But Stacey, I love that you talk about your message of hope. Um, you know, what what is, if you have to share your wisdom with someone who is, planning or may need to leave their home, what would be the one thing that, you would advise them to do straight away? What, you talk about hope, but what would be the one piece of advice you might be able to give to someone that is planning to leave or have just realized from the conversation tonight that, oh, I might need help? Like,
Yeah, I think, you know, it's really important to have that practical support. So much attention is focused on legal or emotional support, which is vital. But
mm,
when you're escaping coercive control, you know, you need those basics, whether it's toiletries, sanitary products, personal safety alarms, or even things like nappies or comfort items for your child, all of which we include. You know, these aren't luxuries, they're tools for survival. So it's things like this that you really need to take into consideration and always keeping your lines of communication open with someone that you can trust because it is very isolating. And as I said with my own story, you know, there was plenty of times when I thought, is it one of my friends that's reporting back? You know, you really do question everything around you and your world becomes so small. Um, in terms of, you know, the escape bags, we've said all along, you know, they're designed to meet those critical first 24 to 72 hours. You know, I think it buys time, it provides dignity, and sometimes it saves a life, especially when we know that the most lethal time for a victim survivor is when he or she is trying to leave the relationship, because that's obviously when the perpetrator knows that they've lost all control. So it's about, you know, removing those barriers to escape. And we know that coercive control strips someone, you know, of their autonomy and their resources. So having something like an escape bag ready and accessible in a public place really gives people a tangible option and when they're ready to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also too with these bags, are worth a lot of money. If you don't have money or access to your own credit cards and your own
Mhm.
funds and your own things like that, something like this small gesture, like you said, of hope can actually not only supply someone with, the nice effects of, being able to wash their hair with products or put skincare on and things like that, but also to that, that monetary value which they might not even have. So
Mhm.
yeah, if you do see there's the escape bag logo is I love that. It's a bird escaping almost like from a cage, if you like, and you can see those in shops or locations all around Australia, which there's a map on the website as well. So please jump on and have a look if you need one, not only here in the Illawarra but around the nation as well. So Stacey, thank you so much for your lived experience. I'm going to come back because I do have a couple more questions for you, but I want to make sure that we tap straight in with Mackenzie because you work within this space. So you're a caseworker within this space. Tell me a little bit about what you do, but also too, we talked a little bit about barriers, but can you just expand on
Oh.
what you can see some of the barriers are?
So I've worked kind of in community organizations responding to domestic and family violence and sexual violence. So much of my work has really involved navigating justice systems and experiences of coercive control and how they sort of sit beside one another. Um, I think there's a few really consistent barriers that I see quite a fair bit. I think one of the biggest ones that I see all the time is wait lists for support is just massive. Like I think about housing in New South Wales can be up to 10 years on a wait list. Sometimes refuges or temporary accommodation is not necessarily even available. And as Stacey pointed out, sometimes they feel unsafe or unsuitable. So it means that people can be ready to leave, but not necessarily have anywhere to go,
Mm,
um, which can make a huge barrier. I think also touching on some of the previous points made about the subtlety of coercive control, it's difficult to name and sometimes even more difficult to act on. We support a lot of women who are often, I guess, as Anastasia said, even seeking reassurance that the behavior that they're experiencing is not okay, that it is violence. So it can be really difficult to articulate these experiences or explain where that underlying fear might come from. I think it becomes even more difficult when you're interacting with services that do require a concrete incident to go off. Um, I think that's also really compounded when you have like legal frameworks and justice procedures that are not necessarily equipped or designed to respond to patterns of violence. I know in New South Wales, even with the coercive control legislation, the broader justice system still operates off that single incident model,
mm,
and that legislation operates off the assumption that that current framework is working. But from our end, we often see that women are frequently misidentified as the perpetrators, especially when they resist or they respond to control, or it leads to further harm or retaliation. I think the other thing too is the just general complexity of need that sort of comes across. Like you have so many intersecting issues with housing, financial involvement with child protection, AOD use, criminalization, cultural intersections, visa statuses, disability or mental health. Um, all of that navigating those intersections, it takes time and it takes support and it takes real advocacy. Um, and it's really hard to um, I think working in silos, especially really sort of is not able to capture the results of those intersections. So for example,
AOD services or treatments that fail to recognize how a perpetrator's control might exacerbate or interfere with the AOD use. And if you're working separately, that information doesn't necessarily get flown between them. Um, Hugely, I think there's also an understandable mistrust of
Mm.
services. It's sometimes due to previous experiences, but can also just be reflective of fear of consequences, higher surveillance, or loss of autonomy. And I think with that comes the recognition that mistrust is more prominent for certain populations as well. So for First Nations women or for people who are on temporary visas, it really does come with a lot more barriers in that sense. Um, and I think also, as Stacey pointed out as well, like the actual ability to access a service, like if you're monitored, if you're tracked, if you're the actual practical steps to access something can be so difficult, like the ability to call or go in and ask for help, it can be so severely limited. So I think it's a huge barrier.
Mm, absolutely. And I really like that you pointed out that single point of reference because that's very much, people have to, even if you go and see your GP or report something to the police, you actually have to come up with what's that one situation, but it might
Mm,
not be the one situation. As Stacey said, it's someone monitoring you, locking down your bank details.
mm,
So many things that I can resonate with what Stacey was saying in regards
massively.
to that controlling of everything in which you do. So that might be really difficult and very frightening to actually go and seek assistance
Yeah.
for that. So many barriers. Anastasia, before I go into a couple of strategies and everything, can you see any other barriers that we're facing with getting that psychological type professional assistance that Mackenzie didn't touch on?
Yeah, I want to add and maybe kind of like speak to dispelling the myth that we've historically sort of spoken to in relationships, which is this kind of it takes two to tango. And particularly if we're looking at like relationship issues, going to couples therapy and working through relationship problems, we actually know that is if there is domestic abuse, that it's a contraindication to do couples therapy because it is likely that the coercive control will actually sometimes just further be perpetuated in the therapy space as a couple going to therapy. So I think not having this kind of notion of it takes two to tango, that it's a toxic pattern between two people. It's actually perpetrated by one person. And as Mackenzie was speaking to, this idea that self-defense is not the same as a kind of like mutual violence, right? We in the clinic see a number of individuals who come through the clinic under Section 14 of the Mental Health Act, which means they've basically been, charged as having committed some sort of offence. And it's not uncommon for us to see women who will come under a Section 14 who are actually, when we really unpack it, they've been victims of coercive control and domestic abuse. And in the process of maybe sort of self-defense or retaliation, they have then been taken to the police and courts and things like that. So I think it's a massive concern that our systems can also further kind of perpetuate the abuse that someone faces, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely, because it is that controlling, but it's very sneaky behavior as well. If you don't know that it's happening to you, then like I can't identify it for yourself. You know that something's wrong, but you might actually not be able to identify it. So that's a really strong point in regards to the couple counselling and how that can actually be turned around that it's the female that's the problem, not the perpetrator. Um, yeah, itself. So, Stacey, did you have anything to add into those barriers that you found? And then we're going to hit those strategies because I really want to talk about the collaboration with community. We don't want to miss that part. And I can't believe that time's slipping away so quickly. So, any
No,
additional barriers there?
that's okay, Simone. I think I probably covered that at the end of my last point anyway, so I'm happy for you to continue.
Amazing. So please feel free that we'll put some things in the chat as well. We do have a couple of questions that come through, and I did anticipate one in regards to tonight we have focused on male female type abuse. As we said right at the start, we will look at different conversations as our webinars go on, but definitely this is just doesn't just happen like one gender to the other. It's yeah, interpersonal relationship with, not just males and females, but male partners together, female partners together. So we're absolutely aware of that. So I just wanted to definitely point out that we will do more webinars opening up the space. But yeah, tonight, just that lived experience with coercive control, just mainly with that women type space. So, Mackenzie, with strategies, if someone came in to see you, what would be, what would be your approach? How would you
Hmm.
combat this?
I guess maybe in terms of uh, what I've found is helpful is number one, consistency, like
Mhm.
showing up, keeping to our expectations, going at a pace that works for them. I don't think it's necessarily having all the answers, but it's being transparent and respectful and survivor led, really. Um, the victim survivor is the expert in their own lives and they're best placed to consider decisions that impact them and to consider their children and their risk. And I think that voice really needs to be centered. I think that really helps to also build trust, which is foundational for any sort of working relationship.
Mhm.
Um, I think that is trust also obviously takes time to develop. So having like soft entry points into a service really helps being able to do that. So social groups that people can access until they feel more comfortable enough to disclose. I think a pattern-based approach is obviously necessary, but it can make a real difference. And I think I've found that mostly in trying to honor someone's narrative and encapsulate that whole pattern and that full story, because there is one there and it really needs to be held in a supportive way. And I think that really significantly in practice for me extends to documentation. That is super supportive and really does map out a pattern of behavior. I also think that the ability to be flexible and creative and resourceful is absolutely essential. It's really, especially when you are working within barriers of safety, like if there's monitoring of phones, if there's like you really have to be somewhat opportunistic when the time comes. I think it's also doing stuff like not necessarily being at one service and you might have to go off to a school or like working within those frames to be able to maximize your chances really to interact and engage and support someone. Um, I think that again is capturing that centering the victim survivor's voice and I think that also really does go down to the not operating on the expectation that the police or the courts will necessarily increase safety and centering someone's voice in that conversation. Um, Generally, also just understanding trauma responses, like knowing why memories and details may be fragmented and delays in disclosing. I think that also really just practically shows up in things like being late to appointments or missing calls or needing to reschedule just due to operating under such fear or distress or exhaustion. And I think maybe Anastasia might be able to better speak to that sort of trauma response. But I think practically that it's operating and meeting someone where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that Stacey with the Esker bags comes into that, creating that really direct, immediate type response. But I love the fact that not one story is the same, but what I do
Mm.
hear is similar, um, yeah, similar things happening. So I, I'm a big advocate that everybody has their story and being able to share that in a really comfortable, safe environment. Mackenzie, sounds like it's really important with the
Mm.
people that you work with, but also to in allowing that person to actually share in a way that's dignified and in a way
Mm.
that that trust is created and probably that story of hope as well. So, Stacey, is that what you're hearing too with that strategies with allowing your story to be heard and how other people should have that safe space to share their story?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know, Simone, we're very fortunate to have the warehouse space, and we do corporate volunteer days every week at Escobags HQ. So people come along in their teams and pack the escape bags. But that we also do a lunch and learn session. So not only are they helping us on a practical sense, they go away with that education piece, and I obviously share my story on the day also. And I think because we only have groups of up to 10 people, it's a really intimate setting. And I always say that, you get these real glimmer moments where it might be someone that comes over to us and says, my sister or my best friend is going through this, and they're not even sure that it is coercive control or domestic abuse. And if only they could be part of a day like this. So, as you say, it's about creating those really safe spaces and again honoring other people's stories. I think we're all guilty of it sometimes. Someone will share something with you and you go, I know exactly what that feels like because I've been through that. So it's really important to give someone that space. And I always say that even in terms of with the stockists, so important that the handover of an escape bag is done in a really empathetic and compassionate way, because if you get that wrong, or if the person that is having the information shared to them from a victim survivor about the abuse that they're experiencing, they may never ever choose to talk about it ever again. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to you've got to. I understand that people need to protect themselves as well, but it's just such a brave step in the right direction when people do have the courage to open up and say what's going on in their lives.
Absolutely. And we had a comment come in on our chat in regards to sometimes it's just not one person, but it could be the entire family that
Mm-hmm.
actually turns on you and creates like, hardship, and you
Yeah.
might have lost everything, including, you know, pets and people and things and, just so many things. So, you know, I uh, I hear that and I want to acknowledge that it might just not be one person, but a whole number of people that actually could be all targeting that one person. So, Anastasia, do you have any more to add in regards to those strategies, but also to how collaboration through improving those strategies with, multi agencies, or how do we do this as a community?
Yeah, I'm a big advocate for collaboration between services and definitely this goes for not just the topic we're speaking about, but I think within mental health and as a psychologist beyond that, but really always working with the team of whoever's involved in a person's care. So particularly in the context of coercive control, making sure that we're as psychologists available to support clients sometimes if they are deciding to go and make, say, a police report, or if they are wanting to access additional services. Really, for us, thinking sort of beyond the therapy room, how can we help be present in that person's life in a way that's going to feel meaningful and supportive to them, and really meet them and where they're at and what they're seeking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just have noticed and a little bit distracted from a chat that came through or a question. And I'm not too sure who would like to take this on the panel, but it says someone has asked if they could please explain the types of technological abuse and financial abuse and how that could be used in coercive control. So I know that Anastasia, we talked about a little bit at the front, but more that technology side, if you'd like to answer or someone else.
I can answer, and then I think the others will probably have things to say as well. But so so there's two parts: the financial and then the tech. With the financial abuse in the context of coercive control, it's basically anything that restricts your freedom or your kind of empowerment when it comes to finances. So often within coercive control, limitations around finances is kind of a tactic to keep someone disempowered. So this could look like putting you on a really strict budget where you're having to ask the person for money and justify what you need money for. It could be limiting your access to bank accounts. Perhaps you don't know how much money the two of you have, where the money's coming from, how money's being used. So kind of hiding those financial resources, preventing you from having a credit card, monitoring what you spend, making you justify that, etc. So that's the financial side. On a tech side, as we heard earlier, this could be sort of any monitoring of devices. So sometimes it can be software installed on computers, laptops, phones, even in cars. It could be cameras or tape recorders that are actually hidden around the home to monitor you without you knowing. It could be someone sort of essentially getting access to your accounts. So if you notice, emails are unread where I haven't actually read that email yet, or any sort of signs of someone having access to your information and monitoring and surveilling what you're doing online. The other thing we sometimes see is that someone can use tech as a form of harassment. So it could actually be repeated phone calls or abusive text messages or requiring someone to check in on the phone at a particular time. So there's a range of different ways in which it can present, but I'll let the others add. I know there's more than that, but their experiences with that as well.
And before I cross over to the other, to Stacey and Mackenzie, but I just want to say if you do eventually do reach out for help and you do, um, have a lawyer or have a legal representative, that can be another form of abuse that kicks in. So the other person continues to write emails back and forth to lawyers to then force you to respond, which ups not only a lawyer fees, but a whole range of things. So it's almost like navigating that systems abuse as well, not just that tech, but also to when you eventually do. Try to begin that new life and trying to actually separate that legal system can be very, very challenging there. So, Mackenzie or Stacey, do you have more to add?
I think Anastasia covered quite a lot. I mean, yeah, it can look like so many different things and it can be so broad. Even just more subtly like not preventing you from going to work. So you aren't able to earn an income or um convincing somebody to work on your business or fines or stuff like fines or debts in your name, that sort of stuff as well.
Mm.
Um, I think, yeah, Anastasia captured quite a fair bit of it though.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just wanted to, before we've got a couple of opportunities for questions, but before we get into that, I did want to look at how do we build a network amongst our community, like where we live, where we are, to actually building that survivor central type referral network. But we've talked a lot about that tonight, but I suppose what are some practical ways that we can actually influence not just us, but how the whole of community can influence by allowing people to have access to more services? I'm going to put that out.
I'm going to jump in here and say I think it's like partly by doing what we're doing tonight, which is broad general education about the topic. And I say that because I was in conversation this morning with a physio who works across the road and has a physio clinic, and he was saying to me, they get a lot of clients who'll come in and start talking about mental health related stuff, but they almost feel like they can because I'm at the physio, I'm not at a psychologist, it's a different setting. And so he was talking to me about having the skills to be able to respond to situations like that. So I think if we can really get broad, to make the understanding of coercive control and domestic abuse so well known and understood that all services, regardless of what service they're meant to provide, if all services know how to at least respond and have a conversation and help a person take whatever the next step might be, I think then we'll be doing a great job.
Absolutely. And I just will echo what Stacey said, that having your functions at your headquarters every month is like a step in that right direction. So,
Oh, it's
yeah.
weekly now, Simone. It's
Oh,
weekly.
weekly. Absolutely. That's incredible. Is it just, do you have to come to headquarters, or is it something that you can do online, or is it, yeah.
Yeah, I think because of the practical side of it, with the packing of the escape bags, it is done, at our warehouse, which is fantastic, and it's a really lovely space. Obviously, that does limit us slightly in terms of, our reach and having our volunteer days. We've had a couple of organisations reach out to us recently to see if we can go to their headquarters, which we're going to be piloting in October, which is exciting. So, staff members will collect the items and then pack their own escape bags and write their messages of hope, and we'll take them back to HQ. But just going on the back, of what Anastasia was saying, I just really think there's so much, excuse me, value in, survivor-led initiatives like Esca bags. And I think the reason they're powerful is because they come from a place of truth. Personally, I know what's needed, not from theory, like the other ladies, but from surviving it. And I think that's equally as important. And where Mackenzie touched on trust with victim survivors, when they see that the support is led by someone who's been there, I think it just builds instant trust. It really shouts from the rooftops, "You're not alone. I understand, and I've got you." And we all talk about, problem shared is a problem halved. And when you stand in front of someone and yeah, that they fully understand what you're going through, because when we're talking about, technology abuse, I used to think, I was losing the plot. I'd try and say to my friends, these listening devices in my house, or I found a, tracking device on my car. And it sounded really James Bond at the time, looking back at that now. And in actual fact, when it all came to fruition, these items were very cheap to purchase online on eBay. And I think there's a lot to say in that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really valid point as well. So, yeah, access to actually tracking people
Mm-hmm.
as well. So, yeah, still this whole webinar comes back to a story of hope, lived experience, but also to allowing people to share their story, but having people to actually hear that as well. So we only have a couple of minutes left. So, Mackenzie, do you have you know, just a brief statement on if you had to share with someone today who was leaving or needed to leave, what would be the one thing that you would say to them? What would be the one piece of advice?
I think just there is help out there, and there's someone who can be in your corner.
Yeah,
I think that, and you're not alone. There's help there.
absolutely. And Anastasia?
I would say lean on trusted services that understand the complexities of coercive control and domestic abuse. So services like women's shelters, 1-800 Respect, Relationships Australia, these services do really have quite an understanding of the complexities where, you know, you won't be told you're crazy, and people know how confusing and hard and difficult and traumatizing these relationships can be for people. So lean on trusted services that are there to help.
Absolutely. And we'll put some services too in our chat. And if you haven't followed Fearless with our LinkedIn, our Facebook page, and our Instagram, please do, because we have a lot of information there, but also too, we'll have a lot of links coming in the next few days with where people can reach out for help. Also considering that on the 27th of June is Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder Awareness Day. So remember that, you know, it's a great day to actually not only observe post-traumatic stress is amongst us, but also to maybe reach out to a friend or out to someone to ask how they're doing, but also to you know, allowing that safe space for people to connect with as well. So, just with our 2 minutes left, I wanted to just, yeah, there's a couple of questions that have just come up. One of the questions was in regards to a meaningful long-term type support. What does that look like? You know, that's a pretty complex answer, but staying safe and being well focused. But is there a long-term type of support system that we have? Like, I know that we've got quick support, but you know, just to be able to answer some of these questions, is there a long-term type support place where we can tap into?
I think there's a couple of different ones, but I think there needs to be recognition that it isn't just one and done crisis. Your house, you're good. Like it, healing and recovery from trauma is an ongoing process, and sometimes that means ongoing casework support or ongoing mental health or like and things come up, and building that trust and that connection with somebody also takes time. Like and I think so. I think the recognition that trauma in itself isn't just a straightforward journey in that way, and it's not just necessarily crisis support where
Mm.
um, coercive control and abuse ends after that crisis either. So I think there are long-term services that could help support that as well.
Absolutely. And I think that you you went directly down the path, Mackenzie, that what I was hoping because of I think it is a long journey, and I don't know if I think sometimes people might feel settled, but it is a trauma and it does affect us, and people need to be able to work through that trauma and you know, look for opportunities that feeling well and that well-being type space. So please, if you are affected, make sure that you do tap into your well-being. For me, I like to run. I like to get out in the middle of the, you know, bush or on the trails, and that's where it kind of helps. I think Anastasia, as a bit of a muso, I could say maybe get it on the piano. But and Stacey, maybe you look like you have your furry friend there that may be a bit of a support. So, ladies, I'd like to thank you for tonight of sharing your not just your stories but your wisdom as well. Also to identifying some struggles that people might go through, but also to keep this conversation going. I'd like to continue the strategies. I'd like to improve how, as a community, we connect to this conversation a little bit more. I will enjoy scheduling in the next few months a follow-up webinar on this, especially as we get close to White Ribbon Day and at the end of the year. So we might be able to have a look at reconnecting and actually opening up this conversation a little bit further. So it's 7:02. We'll have to close, but is there any other burning statements that you might just like to leave, ladies, as we close off for tonight?
Just thank you again, for giving us the opportunity to share our experience and our knowledge with you all today. For anyone that has turned up, that really means a lot as well, whether it's because you're being kind to yourself, your community, or those around you. So, yes, thank you, Simone, for organising this and inviting us to be part of such an important evening.
Not a problem, and I'll see you at headquarters.
You will.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you.
Just
Yeah.
a message of hope and support to anyone who feels like they might be struggling. And for others, I think what shone through in Stacey's story for me was the kindness of other people can go such a long way. And if you're not sure what to do, being a kind person is always a good default.
Absolutely. That kindness and love, just, yeah, and asking questions, being inquisitive, being curious, and all of those good things. So, to the people that are listening tonight, thank you that have checked in. To the people that will be watching this in the future, please connect with Fearless. We'd love to hear more about your ideas, but also to a bit of a shout out for Fearless does operate on donations. So, if you do feel that you do like to support these webinars and continue going, please join our cause into making sure that we can provide you with opportunities to actually talk about some of these hot topics. All right, ladies, well, I'll leave it there for tonight. Have a wonderful evening, and I look forward to connecting in the future. All right.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
ladies.
Take care.